Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the Deceptive Sexuality Trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. For today's conversation episode, I'm really excited to be joined by Rhian Kivits, who is a Relate-trained sex and relationship therapist and a certified DST therapist based here in the UK. She works with both betrayed partners and couples, helping them navigate deceptive sexuality, relational trauma, kinds of things we talk about here, and works online, so is able to work with people from all over the world. We're going to be discussing a little bit about her therapeutic journey and how she came to be involved in this DST model, as well as some of the programs that she's able to offer. In particular for betrayed partners, for whom we know there is often such a lack of resources, particularly if we want to work with this kind of model. And so I'm really pleased to be able to have her on the podcast and to be able to discuss some of this really important stuff. And I hope, as always, that it's illuminating for you. Welcome everybody who's listening to this today, and I've got another opportunity now to speak to a colleague, another DST trained colleague, and a voice that many people maybe won't have heard yet, certainly on this podcast. And having had many conversations with people who have engaged in or are feeling the traumatic impacts of deceptive sexuality trauma, one notable issue has been the lack of support that's out there. And I know it's something I've talked about with many people, particularly here in the UK. There was nobody else trained in the model, and that was always very difficult in terms of referrals and things like that. And so I was very excited a little while back to come across a fellow DST trained therapist based here in the UK. And her name is Rhian Kivits, and I've been getting to know her. We've been liaising a bit. And so, again, very exciting for me, actually, personally, as well as professionally, to be able to have this conversation today and explore some of these themes that we talk about on the podcast. So, Rhian, it's wonderful to have you here. And I'm just really excited that you're here in general in this treatment field, and also that you're here on the podcast to speak with me.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. It's good to be in this extraordinary space with you today, which is as you say, quite a rare thing, seeing as there are not very many of us in the UK doing this work in this way, and quite wonderful that we were able to find each other and connect with this common goal of working with deceptive sexuality trauma.
Even having somebody else here who knows the language, who could talk extraordinary space, it is a wonderful thing. And obviously, as you know, as people listening to this know, I work primarily with men who have engaged in deceptive sexuality. That's what my treatment program is based upon. And so there's always been this longing for me for there to be a similar program, if you like, a sort of sister program, something like that for partners who are experiencing deceptive sexuality trauma. Another reason why it has been so exciting to meet with you. I know you work with partners, you work with couples as well. And so I think we'll see where today's conversation goes, but I'm really interested in exploring your work, some of your thoughts, your perspectives, why this model, this way of working has really appealed to you. And so it's always an opportunity for me to, first of all, have a nice chat, but also for me to learn, because you work with partners, you work in a slightly different way to what I do. So I guess with that being said, I'd love to just open it up to you and we'll see where we go with that topic. But DST, partner trauma work, maybe issues in the treatment field, which are kind of things we talk a little bit about on this podcast. But again, I'd love to hand that to you. We'll see where we go with that.
Okay, well, I came to this work really through my work with couples, and my initial training, as you know, was with Relate. So I came across couples who were impacted by deceptive sexuality because couples would come through the door at Relate. I would be given a file and it might say sex addiction or sexual cheating within the file, because an assessment might have been done by another clinician. And initially, I was working with these couples as a relationship therapist. Well, very soon it became clear to me that traditional couple therapy approaches were absolutely not right and not enough for these couples. So I started to do some research and went on some courses and some CPD training around helping couples impacted by sex addiction. And I was working for many years, but it never quite felt right. And it was then when I went into private practice and started to work with narcissistic abuse survivors that something actually clicked for me, that I was seeing something very similar in these couples. And after many hours on the internet and a lot of research, I came across Omar and his work. And to be quite honest with you, when I started to read about his work and the DST model, it felt like a breath of fresh air to me, because it was outlining everything that I was sensing and everything that I was leaning towards in my practice. But sometimes as a clinician, I think you need to see this in black and white to be validated in your approach, right? So I was incredibly inspired by his work and made the decision that I would do this training. I had held back from other professional trainings over the years because they weren't quite resonating with me, but the DST model just felt to me so true. There's something about it that feels so deeply true to me, that I was lucky enough to be able to dive in and do that training. And yeah, here I am today.
There's something really amazing about hearing you describe that journey, because when I speak to many betrayed partners through this lens, they describe this experience of almost having this internal knowledge, internal experience of something, but not having the language for it. Like something doesn't feel right, but I don't have the language for it. And they come across this model and it's like a light bulb moment. They hear Omar talking or maybe even my podcast now. And it's like, that's the thing. That's what I've been feeling and experiencing internally, and that validates it. And so it's really interesting to hear you describing almost like a similar experience from a clinician perspective. You could tell something was missing, and then once you heard the words for it, it kind of slotted into place.
Yes, absolutely. And so as a couple therapist, I would often meet couples who had perhaps been in therapy initially together, and the therapy had broken down and failed. And then they would come to me because they were trying again. And I would hear these stories of how traditional couple therapy was pushing these couples to make decisions about their relationships really quickly, pushing partners to forgive really quickly, and pushing for repair. And also how traditional couple therapy would dig into the details of the relationship very, very swiftly. And that would, of course, make the betrayed partner feel like she was doing something wrong. That was the reason for her partner's betrayal. The focus would very much be on relationship deficits and relationship repair. And this made me deeply uncomfortable for quite a number of years because, I think as a clinician, I was feeling into betrayed partner's discomfort. And now that I have done this training, and I was working with principles aligned with the model before I trained in the model because of my work with narcissistic abuse survivors. So now that I've done this training, and when I started to work with what I intuitively felt to be right and true, I could see that the outcomes for those couples and for those betrayed partners were so much better. That there was so much more truth, so much more hope, so much more validation for them of their experience. And I didn't have this sense that somehow I was working with pieces of the puzzle that are real, because of course relationships do have deficits, and in every relationship each partner is responsible for aspects of what is happening and what is going wrong. But those deficits and those problems are not the reason for sexual deception, and they do not excuse sexual deception. And the wonderful thing about this model is that I am able to say to couples and to betrayed partners, two things can be true at the same time, right? That there may have been problems in your relationship. There may be very, very deep, very, very, very sad reasons for the betraying partner's choices. But at the same time, the other thing that's true is that those reasons and those problems do not count as excuses for the sexual deception. And just hearing that is a breath of fresh air for so many betrayed partners.
I think back to what you were saying around the way, I don't think you use this word, but my language is disempowerment, the way partners are disempowered. And then even in couples therapy can be further disempowered. So it's very quickly, are you forgiving? Are you holding on to the past too much? I've heard all sorts of horror stories about, sex plans being set up very early and physical intimacy plans. And all of these things that take someone who has been disempowered by having reality manipulated, and we're now taking that person, and if we're not careful, actually pushing them even further down. And it seems like you really intuitively felt that disconnect in yourself, like you were empathically connected to this partner in front of you. And then your initial training, I guess, is pushing you towards ways of dealing with that aren't lining up with what you're feeling in the room in that moment.
Yes, neutrality. That whole paradigm of neutrality that you need to work really hard to establish as a clinician who works with couples. Well, that goes out of the window, to be honest, because we have this model of abuse victim trauma, right? And we have this model of restorative justice that we are following here. So, neutrality and looking for 50-50 contributions to this problem is just not a thing. And, the other thing about this is how that approach encourages betrayed partners to sideline themselves. And so the shame that she feels is triggered. The invalidation that she experiences through that approach will encourage her to retract rather than to use her voice and to say what's okay for her and what's not okay for her. And it can even encourage her to stay silent when She knows inside that there are so many things that she needs and wants to say about the way the relationship contract has been broken, about the way her morals and values have been compromised, about the disappointment she feels because the promises, the expectations have just been shattered for her. And she needs to be offered a space to be able to say those things, to be able to acknowledge those things. Otherwise, how can her partner ever be accountable? She's not able to support his process of change if that's something that she wants to do when she doesn't have space for her authentic voice. And I feel really strongly about that.
Yeah, done episodes devoted purely to this idea of the voice. And I tend to use that language of, she needs to be able to tell her story. And all of these things, all of these, moving forward, forgiving, moving on, letting go, all of these ideas that we might implicitly push onto a partner if we're not illuminated in this kind of way of working. They all directly go against using the voice, telling your story. And there's a lot of grieving to do as well. Grieving the past. There is something that person thought they thought existed, that they now realize didn't exist, or certainly didn't exist in the way they believed it did. There's a loss there. There's anger there. There's so much that needs to be processed. And it's kind of funny because I'm so used to talking this language now, this language of abuse, victim trauma. It seems shocking when I come back and remind myself each time that this is so much of the field, is taking someone that's been harmed and actually almost silencing them, pushing them down. I think you said sidelined in their own treatment. Just sad thing to reflect on. And again, something it's so clear that you could really just implicitly tell didn't feel right to you. I think there's something very amazing about that.
Yeah, that's right. And there are so many influences that she will experience outside of the therapy room that I believe it's really important what she experiences inside the therapy room is aligned with the highest truth and the highest good. So, for example, the conflicting messages that she might hear from friends, from family members who say to her, yeah, but he's a really good dad. That he's a really good dad narrative. I'm not denying it. He might be a really good dad, but that doesn't excuse what's happened in their situation. And the message, I mean, look, there is still, it's 2026 as we record this conversation, right? And there is still so much objectification, sexual objectification out there. Arguably, yeah, of women, but of men as well. Let's be honest. Sexual objectification is a big thing in 2026. And so where there are people saying to her outside of the therapy room, oh, that's normal. That's not deception. That's not cheating. That's just what men do. It's everywhere nowadays. We have to learn to live with it. Maybe you're just insecure. Maybe you're just worried about your body. There are so many messages like that out there that I don't want to be part of that for those betrayed partners. I don't want to be part of that for those couples. Because if I'm part of that, then I'm actually part of the problem. And I don't really want, as a professional who runs a business, to be paid to be part of the problem either. That doesn't feel good to me, to be really frank about it. So she has that. She has so many voices. There are so many influences outside of the therapy room that are unhelpful. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that and to educate, actually. on that, so that men, women, and couples can stand in the truth with this, in the truth of her deeply felt, deeply painful experience, because that's what it is. It is for some partners, arguably, I think for every partner who comes in the door with this kind of problem, with the problem of deceptive sexuality, it's arguably the most painful experience she will have in her entire life. And we're working with that. I mean, it's an honor, but it's also a huge responsibility to do our best and to do the very best job we can for these people who are entrusting the deepest pain and, in a way, the greatest vulnerability to us, to be held in our spaces, in our therapy groups, in our therapy room.
Yeah, and if you're showing up as a practitioner with any kind of sort of values, ethics, ethics should be at the heart of the therapeutic framework, then the idea of taking someone in that level of vulnerability, in their greatest pain and vulnerability, and actually adding further harm or making things worse is something we should take extremely seriously. That's why this model has a big element you mentioned earlier, restorative justice model. That word justice carries a lot of weight. But yeah, I think we see over and over what you just said it is about the greatest, up there with the greatest sort of pains and devastations that people can experience. So it is a huge honor, but it is a huge sort of duty and weight as well in how we show up to deal with that. I note as well, you talked about lots of messages. There are no shortage of messages that they might receive about, oh, you should just move on, and oh, all guys do it, or oh, it's just porn, or whatever message someone might receive. There's also, we know, the shame of staying sometimes. There's, oh, you should leave him. If that was me, I'd leave, that kind of thing. So either way, there can be all sorts of pushing and pulling. Then you might have a therapist telling you what you should be doing as well. And so there's this real sense, I think, and again, I'd love to get your take on this, because whilst I speak to partners a lot, it doesn't form the basis of my work. But there's this really important sense of developing the self, at self-valuing, rediscovering the self sometimes. And so when you've got all these voices maybe pulling you to and fro, my guess is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my guess is that that's a big part of the work, is really helping them find their own voice and their own truth in that. So I'd just love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Sure. Well, look, one thing that we can't ignore is the impact of that reality collapse, right? So she was living in a pre-existing reality where she thought her relationship was a certain way. She thought her partner and his sexual behaviors and his sexual tastes were a certain way. And then there is this exposure of the truth, or sometimes just a partial truth. That's enough. And there is this reality collapse. We then have the integrity abuse. That was part of the pre-existing reality and then becomes a huge part of the new reality after exposure, after discovery. And those two factors can really contribute to a betrayed partner feeling like she has completely lost and forgotten herself. She does not really know who she is anymore. She doesn't know who he is. She doesn't know what relationships are about. She completely loses touch with her true self. And so, how can we expect betrayed partners to begin this journey and know what they want if they're not in touch with themselves? How can they possibly know what the future holds? How can they know what's right for them? They can't. And so asking them to make choices, huge choices that can impact their lives, their lifestyle, their children, their future. How can they make this choice around whether to stay or go, for example, when they are not at all in touch with themselves? They have lost and forgotten who they are because of this experience. It's really unfair to ask anybody to make that kind of decision at the beginning of their journey. So what I believe these betrayed partners need is the grace and the time and the space to be able to say, I don't know what I want. I don't even know what I need. And that's okay for now. But I'm going to find myself again. I'm going to find my voice. I'm going to find out who I am again. I'm going to reclaim those parts of myself that I've lost and forgotten as a result of this experience that I have been living in unwittingly, unknowingly. But now I'm unfortunately living in with a greater sense of reality. I'm going to give myself the time and the space to reconnect with who I truly am. And then I'm going to make decisions, and those decisions are going to be powerful. They're going to be right for me. They're going to be the highest choices for my family and my children. And they're also going to be the most appropriate decisions for my relationship. And that might be to stay or to go. We don't, as clinicians, and I know you will agree with this, we don't have to be attached to that at all. That is the decision of the betrayed partner. But please, betrayed partners, make that decision from a place of reconnection and connection with yourself, not from a place of feeling lost and forgotten and disconnected and perhaps clinging on to the security of what you thought you knew, right? It's huge.
What I hear in there as well is that requires, both for the people involved, but for you as the practitioner, patience. So you are not pushing, you are holding. Again, people who listen to these podcasts will be familiar already with some of this language, but we're containing, we're holding, we're sitting with, we're attending to. We are not pushing and saying, but he's been sober for 3 months now, or whatever else it might be. It's no, let's slow down. Let's help you develop your voice. Let's hear what is coming up for you. And that is such a profound thing for someone who has experienced that reality fragmentation, to just held and the pressure taken off. Not easy work, but that is profoundly important work.
It's so important. And this all connects in with what we were saying about sidelining themselves, betrayed partners sidelining themselves. Because while you are sidelining yourself, how can you possibly be connected to what you really want and need and desire? You cannot be. So a lot of the work needs to be focused on that reclamation of the self, that reconnection with the self. And that takes time. What I find amazing about this is the way that a person's reality will collapse in an instant when they discover their partner's betrayal, their sexual deception. But in order to reclaim the self, we might need to be very, very spacious. And so in the UK, that's a very common, very traditional model of short-term therapy, perhaps short-term couple therapy, which is often a first port of call for people when they discover their partner's sexual cheating. It doesn't suit. It's not appropriate. Because, find yourself in 6 weeks is a great label for some sort of, short-term, surface level coaching program. But with DST and with the work we do, this is deep inner work, and it takes time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I said at the start I was so excited when I came across you and I found out that you existed, because I think we're honestly, just on a societal level, we're really behind on this stuff, but particularly in the UK, therapeutically speaking, I think we're way behind. Way, way, way behind. I think there's so few options out there for someone that really wants to do this kind of work. Again, I want to be careful what I say, so I'm not calling out anyone specifically. But yeah, there's programs out there where I see, it's 10 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever to heal your trauma and to, rekindle your relationship. And I think they're either way better therapists than I am, or or something is being kind of, dare I say, missold there. And that makes me really uncomfortable. I'd much rather be having this kind of honest conversation about, this is slow work. This is hard work. It takes a long time. That's not maybe what people want to hear, but I think people resonate with the truth. And I think anyone walking this path knows that this is not quick. This is not going anywhere quickly.
Yes, absolutely. And look, with the program I'm offering, yes, it will be 8 weeks. It is a piece. It is an initial piece. It is where to begin. It's not from start to finish in 8 weeks and then move on with your life and everything's fixed. Absolutely not. I think clients, betrayed partners benefit from being able to engage with the illumination, the initial phase of the work, and then to be able to breathe, to metabolize more deeply, to be able to peel away deeper layers. So this model of short-term therapy, and perhaps even just short-term couple therapy, I don't believe is fit for purpose when it comes to the kinds of problems that we are working with. And we do live in a world where I think increasingly people do want quick fixes and easy solutions and instant gratification with everything, including their healing. But we know that isn't really my experience.
Yeah, I think when I look at my program, a couple of different things, but I run a 16-week one, for example, and I very much think of that as a foundation. I don't oversell anything. It is a foundation upon which we can build. I think that's a healthy way of thinking about it. And this model, this DST model, there's a really important psychoeducation element to it. So learning the model, finding the language for the experience, understanding the problems, understanding what healing looks like, that alone is part of the treatment, which is why I think it works well with these kind of time-limited programs to build that foundation. I'm curious how that is for you then. So you come into this model, it resonates with you, it seems to make sense of that feeling you were experiencing in the traditional couples work when infidelity was part of the story. And I guess you find the language for it. And I'm curious how it is with maybe partners you work with, or how you'll be going through that in your own program, how you see the psychoeducation and the framework of the model itself perhaps being an important part of the journey for a partner.
It's a huge part of that journey, but it isn't just about let's look at the terminology and the education and the model and sit there with it. It's about let's understand this, but let's also enjoy those light bulb moments that you have along the way. And certainly when I trained with Omar, I was having those light bulb moments all the time. Oh, wow, this is how this concept shows up in the cases I work with. This is how this concept is being felt, being experienced by me, myself. And this is what I think happens for betrayed partners, it isn't like reading a textbook or just, learning something factual. Illumination happens on different levels, right? I want to say it's kind of, mind, body, soul. Um, it can actually be very deep to go through that first psychoeducational piece. Yes, you'll get the education, but you will also start to see exactly how this model applies for you in your case, in your deeply felt experience. And so there is healing in psychoeducation. At least that's my experience of it. And certainly that's what clients have shared with me, that there is deep healing in that psychoeducation, because what's actually happening is that you are seeing your own story through that DST lens, and you're going, oh yeah, so now I know what I need to do next. Or now I understand what was happening when I was feeling this confusion in my mind, in my body, So psychoeducation is healing. And I don't think we should underestimate the power of it for betrayed partners. In fact, I think it's essential. I know Omar says it's essential, but in my experience, in my felt experience, it's essential. Because when we have a language to be able to express what it is that we are going through, there is a sense that we become much more connected to our authentic responses to that reality. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, it's that idea of being able to, we link it to the voice again. We've already spoken a couple of times, really being able to name one's experience, not just on that cognitive clinical level, like I have the fancy terms for it, but I can actually, I understand, I am connected to my experience, and I'm able to voice it through the frame of the model. That's how I kind of, certainly actually with the men I work with as well. This is a challenging model. It's naming abuse. It's naming abuse victim trauma realities. And my experience is the men I work with don't shy away from that. They're often inspired by that because it resonates with their internal experience. They see that actually this does explain what was going on. And so I feel like you're aiming something similar for maybe working with the partners as well.
Yeah, it is to do with the voice. It is also to do with their internal power, which they need. This whole experience is so disempowering. When you have a language, when you understand, when you have a framework, some of that power is restored. Some of that cup is filled up. And you start to see that there is a way through, that you can and you will survive this. And it makes sense. And it's real. So if anybody tries to invalidate you or gaslight you or challenge you around your experience of this, the trauma that you are going through as a result of this, you will be able to voice up and say, no, I know what I know. I know that this is true and my experience is valid. And now I know what I need as a result. So that's really the power, I think, of psychoeducation. It re-empowers the betrayed partner, and there is healing, and there is a reconnection to the self.
Maybe going off on a slight tangent, but I'm thinking back to a couple of the things you said earlier and how I really feel like I'm getting a better understanding of you and why this all fits together so much for you as well. You talked about initially doing traditional couples work. Then I think you said about working with narcissistic abuse in private practice. And that's sort of fitting with some of what you were seeing. You're now naming just there the, the gaslighting, the crazy making that can occur, and why education is then so important for the betrayed partner to be able to see what is happening, understand when gaslighting is happening, and advocate for the self. So I just bring that in to acknowledge that it really makes sense to me why this model resonated with you. It's like you already knew it, you just hadn't found it yet. Um, there's just something so lovely in that. I can imagine you coming across this integrity abuse idea and looking at it and thinking, yes, that's exactly what I've been seeing. That's it. So it's just great to hear that.
Yes, that is exactly what I've been seeing. And, when couples would come into my practice where narcissistic abuse was very clear and very present, quite often what would be revealed is there were also deceptive sexuality issues. And so this was really how I became so exposed to these issues in my practice because of working with narcissistic abuse. And I think clients would look at my website and they would see that, I was experienced with narcissistic abuse, not afraid to work with personality disorder, not afraid to work with childhood trauma. And so those kinds of cases would come up on the radar. And I remember my supervisor saying to me, my clinical supervisor saying something to me like, "Gosh, Rhian, you get really challenging cases, don't you? I don't know why this is. I don't know how these people sniff you out." But really that's why, I think. And so in these cases, as I said, often deceptive sexuality, sexual cheating would be part of the picture. That might not be why those clients would initially have come to me. They might have come to me because of the narcissistic abuse in the relationship. The betrayed partner might have come to me because of not being able to understand what's going on in her relationship. Or because her relationship has ended and she realizes that she's been in a relationship with a narcissist. And then deceptive sexuality would be part of the story. And we would need to understand exactly how that had impacted the relationship or the individual betrayed partner, dependent upon the case. And so I came at things from that angle, whereas obviously Omar was coming at things from the angle of, this is a solution, right? This is a model for this problem. I was coming across this problem as an issue that clients maybe hadn't even fully identified and didn't even know that they needed to address. But when I came across it, my goodness, I knew that it needed to be addressed because the impact, the trauma was so palpable.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, the two thoughts that come up for me are one, it's, as you know, we talk in this model about vibing in and frequency, that kind of thing. It's like you were kind of vibing in with what was going on, again, before you had the language for it, but really see why the model connects so much with your work. But also, I think there's something quite unique and quite special about your journey having gone that way, because I think I'm right in saying at least the majority of DST trained professionals or people I've worked with started coming from more the sex addiction world or compulsive sexual behavior world, and then adding in this bit about abuse dynamics. Whereas there's something interesting that you found the DST model from the abuse dynamics side. So it's just, yeah, something very interesting about that maybe the bit of the model that is harder for some people to swallow at the start was the bit that actually drew you to it in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. Because I know and knew back then that it's such an important part of the story and the dynamics going on in those relationships. And if that's not addressed, then I believe the problems will perpetuate and they will continue. So it has to be addressed. It has to be acknowledged. It has to be named for what it is. And that can be really tough. And I remember in one of Omar's training sessions, he was talking about how important it is for us to name the abuse victim trauma reality and how challenging that is for some clinicians, many clinicians. And I was thinking, it's not that challenging for me because I have to call it what it is. So I'm really curious. Why is he saying this? And then it clicked. This is exactly why. Because a lot of those clinicians were coming from a sex addiction background. And as we know, in that world, sex addiction is viewed a certain way. And we have, the addict and the codependent who is addicted to the addict, etc. But the words abuse victim trauma are not used. And I think that might be why I was so uncomfortable every time I looked at sex addiction focused trainings and pulled back. It felt like, no, that's not for me. That's not for me. It doesn't feel right. Because there's something enabling about that.
Yeah, I think it's a really insidious thing where the danger is if we're looking through a pure sex addiction lens, we're missing we've mentioned disempowerment, we're missing the power imbalance. We're seeing actually the addict is the victim in some ways, the victim of the disease of sex addiction, or however we might formulate that. And so we're not seeing this power differential. And then the danger is, as we said earlier in this discussion, our interventions then might further disempower the person who is already one down in the relationship because of the betrayed partner's experience. And so seeing it through that lens that, this isn't just taking a sex addiction idea and adding in integrity abuse or a concept like that. It is fundamentally looking at the whole problem through a completely different lens, but evidently a lens that you were already looking through before you even started the training. So there's something just really cool about that.
Yes, yeah. And it's a dialectical model, isn't it? That's what makes it so incredible, I believe anyway, because just thinking about the work that you do, Chris, with men, of course, those men who come through your programs and who work with you will have, many of them, I'm sure, really painful stories. A strong, there'll be a strong theme around their sexual history, their complex trauma shaping, and you are working with that. And you are working with that, I'm sure, with great compassion. And you are working with their inner child, their little boy, etc. Right? And we are not denying any of that in this model. So there's something about that feels much more fit for purpose than a sex addiction approach. But at the same time, we can be dialectical and say, yeah, all of that is true. All of that is relevant. All of that is why this behavior has manifested. But there are these pieces here for these betrayed partners in the form of the integrity abuse and the deception. And these pieces are not okay. And we can hold all of that in the same space. And I think that's what's so powerful about the model. I really do.
Yeah, I think that correctly applied, it is clearly naming the reality of what has happened and is happening, but it is humanizing both people involved. That's the key thing. It's when we say there's a power differential, the goal is not to then kind of trash the one person to lift the person up. It's humanizing both, but recognizing that through the lens of restorative justice, that journey of humanization and healing looks this way because of the reality that we're talking about. But yeah, I think I love that you mentioned that. Always want to be clear that it is not about actually suppressing either person. Ultimately, my view is for the men I work with, I believe they are actually liberated by knowing the truth, even when it's a painful truth. I often say in the groups, the truth is always empowering. It can be uncomfortable, but ultimately the truth is always more empowering than not telling the truth. That's right at the heart of this model, I think.
And that, I suppose, leads into the idea of these men becoming men of integrity. And those are the kinds of men that women actually want to have relationships with, you know?
Yeah. It's if we think of some of the phrases, you know, when I've had these discussions with Omar, we've talked about integrity, intimacy, integration. We've talked about being honest, loving, and whole. We've talked about being in self-contact, intimacy with the self, and the ability to authentically and honestly use the voice. That sounds wonderful. Like the guy that can do all of those things, the guy that's in integrity, intimacy, integration, honest, loving, whole. To your point, that is something to strive for and really stand up for. So again, this journey is anything but suppressing and pushing down. It's actually helping someone be, I think, strong in a healthy way. And I think that links to what you said about your work with betrayed partners as well. It's about finding your center, um, finding your voice, naming your truth, naming your needs, owning your boundaries. There's something very humanizing and strong, I think, for both people when we can really, really effectively do this kind of work.
Mm, mm. Well, and of course, this idea of being honest, loving, and whole, I really feel that betrayed partners end up on this journey where they have to do that for themselves, because what they realize is that this hasn't been their experience within their relationship. Their partner hasn't been honest, loving, and whole for them. And so they decide, I'm going to do this for me. This is how I'm going to show up for myself. And then perhaps a partner is going through your good program, or, working on themselves through the DST model. And that partner will transform and show up as that honest, loving, and whole man that she was longing for. And maybe she believed she had before discovery of these issues. But such a lovely, such a beautiful concept, isn't it? And it's simple, but it's beautiful, honest, loving, and whole.
Yeah, basic human conditions to be honest, loving, and whole. And we all know none of us are perfect in any of those things. They are all pathways we're working our way down. But, you know, the programs we run, the work we do, the model we use, that is what we're aiming at. We're aiming at, it's not just sobriety or freedom from certain behaviors or distress reduction. It is moving to something positive, not just moving away from negative things. And I guess I'm aware of the time. We probably haven't got too much longer to speak, but I'd love to maybe get a sense of how that fits in with your program. Again, I'm so excited about this. Somewhere for me to refer to as a start. So for a selfish reason, it's a wonderful thing, but so excited to think that there might be something along the lines of what I do available for partners as well, because it's another way that I think there's an imbalance in this field. You know, there's this disempowerment of partners. And then when treatment is sought, there tends to be a lot more available for the men. And I find myself sitting with that discomfort of prioritizing men in my program and almost having to turn partners away, essentially. Very uncomfortable.
So my program is called Recovery Compass. And I named my program that way because I had this inner vision of my betrayed partners holding their compass and finding their way, finding their own direction through this pain and through this trauma. I didn't want to position it as an 8-week fix or an eight-week solution from A to B in 8 weeks. So that's why I named my program Recovery Compass. And really what I'm offering in those 8 weeks is the psychoeducation of illumination, with that opportunity to engage with those light bulb moments that you might have about your case, about your specific situation as a betrayed partner, to help those betrayed partners understand what has happened so that they have a language for what has happened to them, whilst stabilizing along the way. So as we know, good practice when it comes to trauma is to start with stability. And so this is 8 weeks of psychoeducation, illumination, stabilization, and clarity. There is no pressure in my program to make decisions about what the future holds. There is no attachment to you must leave, you must stay, you must repair. There is no attachment to that. And that's because I believe when you hold your own compass, you will be empowered to make those choices for yourself when the time comes. And as you know, when it comes to healing through and processing trauma, we need to come back to ourselves. It's our brain that has been impacted. It's our body within which we feel those traumatic feelings. And it's our body that displays those trauma symptoms. And so we cannot be looking as betrayed partners to our betraying partner to heal and fix those issues. So my program is designed to encourage women, betrayed partners, to take ownership of their minds and bodies and to lean into, to engage with those processes and practices that can help them reduce their trauma symptoms and anchor to some inner stability for herself, for themselves. The other thing that we know is that when betrayed partners discover, and there is such shock and there is such pain when you discover that you've been in this sexually deceptive relationship, that there is this terrible cognitive dissonance. The comfort you desire is from the very person who has hurt you, and this is such a painful turmoil to be in. And so something I feel is very, very important, that I'm very passionate about, and that will be there for my partners in this program, is the sense that, well, we can step out of that because we're going to learn how to attend to ourselves. So we are going to dive into those trauma healing and emotional regulation practices that enable us to attend to and to care for ourselves. And we're going to find the space, the grace, and the voice to be able to advocate for ourselves so that we can include those practices in our lives. So in a nutshell, that's what my program is about. And I hope that during those 8 weeks, those betrayed partners will at least be able to anchor to their stability, to be able to find their compass and start using it. So there will be a reconnection to their intuition, to their sense of self. But they will also get that very important psychoeducation so that they have a language, they understand the model, and they are given the opportunity to decide what their way forward will look like.
Yeah, so I guess what I hear there is really for anyone who resonates with this model, with the kind of things that we speak about on this podcast, it's really quite a great opportunity to be embedded in that model, really embedded in that way of working. And I also hear this kind of through line. You've talked a lot today about partners being sidelined in treatment and wanting to center partners. There's like a real theme developing there. And I hear that in how you describe the program. So the program is not about the person that betrayed them. It might be about the story of betrayal, but it's really about them and centering them.
A lot of betrayed partners want to understand how and why this could have happened, right? And we can do that. That's part of illumination education, right? We need to understand how and why this has happened, but we can do that without taking a focus on fixing, changing, or taking responsibility for the pieces that belong to your partner, right? So that's important to know. I think also a lot of betrayed partners want to know, well, what could the path ahead look like if I want to repair, if I want to stay in this relationship. And so it's important to have that information without feeling like we have to force it, take responsibility for it, and make it happen. So I'm very keen on answering those important questions, but we do have to retain a focus on what is ours to hold and what is his to hold.
It's wonderful to speak with you, and it's been wonderful, as I said, to get to know you. And I'm really grateful for your heart and your passion for the work. I think, as we said, this is very difficult work to do. And so I think it's not something you do just for the sake of it. It's something you do because you're passionate. And I think that really clearly comes through even in how you're describing the work, describing your journey with this work so far. So I'm so thankful for what you do, and your willingness to do this work. And maybe we will speak again on the podcast sometime. It would be great to have you again.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me. It's been such an enriching conversation and amazing to be able to speak to somebody else who understands and who implements the model. Thank you.
Great. I'm sure we will speak again soon. I just wanted to add a quick extra note to say, if you do want to find out more information about Rhian's Recovery Compass program, then I'm going to put the information you need in the show notes, so you'll be able to find it there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the Deceptive Sexuality Trauma model itself, you can visit minwalamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.